Look, three entities are suing the ACC. It could lose its TV contract in 2027. Things are looking bleak. If you are Duke, is the Big 12 your next home? This is a Locked On Big 12, Locked On Blue Devils crossover.
You are Locked On Big 12, your daily podcast on the Big 12 Conference. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Thursday, everybody. Welcome to a Locked On Big 12, Locked On Blue Devils crossover. I'm Drake Toll from America's #1 Big 12 podcast, Locked On Big 12. Thank you for making this show your first listen every single day. And for the Blue Devils fans out there, thanks for making JJ Jackson's show your first listen, Locked On Blue Devils. JJ, today we're going to hit, can Duke find a way into the Big 12 if the ACC folds? Why would Duke not like this move? As well as, hey, let's all work together, bring both sides in to create a relationship between the conference and one of the elite athletic institutions in the country. JJ, that is where I want to start. I wouldn't have said that a month ago. I would not have said that a month ago because football has not been elite at Duke, and that is what pushes the needle in expansion. You must be good or profitable at football to find your way into a power conference. But per the EADA, the literal U.S. government, Duke over the last 2 decades, and specifically last year, is one of the 30 most valuable programs across the board in this country, and that to me screams value. They're right there close to a TCU in the Big 12 or close to a Louisville who the Big 12 will likely target. Duke feels like one of the teams that is safe in realignment.
Yeah, I would hope so. I certainly think when we look at where they rank, as you just mentioned in the EADA and other metrics like that Duke's able to kind of hold their own in that regard. On the football side of things, though, we can be realistic and just accept the fact that traditionally Duke has not been a strong football program. We've had high years in the mid-90s with Steve Spurrier. David Cutcliffe had a good run or two in 2013 all the way to the ACC championship game. And Mike Elko certainly did an amazing job for Duke football over these last 2 seasons. They'd never been the host of College Game Day on the football field before this past season when they hosted Notre Dame. They had that epic win over Clemson to start the year at Wallace Wade Stadium in week 1 on that Labor Day Monday night game on ESPN. So the football program is on the right trend if Manny Diaz can sustain where Duke is at, but still, in the grand scheme of things, if you're these conferences that are looking for realignment and kind of schools to go out and grab, football is not going to be Duke's calling card when you're thinking about why they should come join your league.
Talking about the ACC in general, before we go too deep specifically into Duke, as someone who hosts a Locked On show associated with that conference, give me the thermometer. Is it thumbs up, thumbs down? How do we feel about the security of this league?
Yeah, probably thumb sideways is where I'm currently positioned, right? Not knowing what exactly is going to happen. The momentum is certainly there that we could be reaching the final days of the ACC. But for Duke and particularly a lot of those other North Carolina member institutions, when you're talking about UNC and NC State and Wake Forest, those founding members, right? They were there in 1953 when the league formed. 70 years this thing has been happening, and Duke has been a part of the ACC. So for that reason, I think you don't want to believe that this could be the end of it, right? That in the years to come, we could no longer have an ACC. We want to be celebrating that the Atlantic Coast Conference has turned into this All-Coast Conference by adding SMU and Cal and Stanford to the mix, not trying to think about the reality that the league's going to be just shut down entirely. I think that's kind of where we're at right now. Although with the recent news from Florida State and Clemson that you've been talking about a lot on the show, it looks like maybe we are reaching those final days.
It was a great quote from Dalton Pence, who hosts Locked On Louisville. He said that every team should have a contingency plan. You are an idiot if you don't have a contingency plan in realignment if you're an ACC school. And let me be clear for Duke fans and Virginia Tech fans and even BYU or Texas Tech, when the Big 12 looked like it was going to fall apart 3 years ago, everybody had one of those. We thought about TCU to the Pac-12. How could an Oklahoma State segue its way into the SEC? It doesn't mean your conference is going to die, but there's at least that backup option if it does. Does it feel like Duke, Vincent Price, the president, even have some sort of plan or something lined up, or is it ride the ACC ship to the bottom if that's where it goes?
I would like to think, and I think I could be
Yeah.
safe to know, right, that there
Yeah.
is a follow-up plan there. But I do know that the history means a hell of a lot to Duke and to those founding members of the ACC. I know the pride and tradition in the state alone. I think back to about a year and a half ago when Commissioner Jim Phillips comes in and he moves the conference office from Greensboro, North Carolina, where it had stood since 1953, to Charlotte. The move makes so much sense, right? ESPN has the massive headquarters, or massive studio space that they've had in Charlotte for a decade plus now with the SEC network. And you just got this deal with the ACC network and ESPN now. So a move to a bigger area in Charlotte, a bigger hub when you're talking about airports and that sort of thing makes sense. It's forward thinking. However, the traditionalists in the league can't believe that we moved away from Greensboro, North Carolina, where the Coliseum had hosted the ACC basketball tournament for all these years. So in terms of those contingency plans, I would like to think that they're had, but I can't speak on that for a fact.
Look, again, JJ, there are going to be Big 12 fans who say Duke is not someone the Big 12 would likely move forward with when we talk a Louisville or Miami or Dennis Dodd's dream scenario that he brought up at CBS Sports of Clemson or Florida State finding their way to this conference, which I think is just completely impossible. But even a USA Today lists the Magnificent Seven. These are 7 schools that have met over the past few months to examine the ACC's grant of rights. This was released about a year ago when all this smoke started getting kicked up. It features Clemson, Florida State, Miami, North Carolina, NC State, Virginia, and Virginia Tech. They're the ones that wanted to originally explore how to move forward inside or outside of the ACC. Does it worry you that Duke wasn't a part of that initial scout group that tried to test the conference?
100%. You never want to be the kid left out, right? Never, ever, ever want to be the kid left out in terms of what's next. I think that Duke, in a lot of ways, has kind of been out there as an outlier. We talk about what they've been able to do athletically, certainly on the basketball court. But then when you're talking about the university as a whole, a lot of academic pedigree, pride, and tradition and what they're able to do there. We talk about being a private institution sometimes can separate you from the other conversations that are being had and that sort of thing. But I'd be foolish to say that we're nosy, right? We want to be a part of the gossip and know what the conversations are being had. And as a founding member of the ACC, again, then there since 1953, you kind of want to be able to hold the other schools in the league up to the same level as you and like cheer on, promote the ACC living on, but that's just not been the case as of late.
Yeah. JJ, why would Duke not want to join the Big 12? Let's go there next on Locked On Big 12 and Locked On Blue Devils, a crossover edition with the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am competitive. Not shocking. All my friends would tell you that. And I get to flex my competitive side, that's English, when it comes to Monopoly Go. Look, Monopoly Go is where I go when I want to play the old-fashioned classic Monopoly that I love to play, but on the go, and I can do it wherever I want against my friends and beat my friends with unique stickers that you can trade with them or take from them, cool new playing pieces to travel boards with, hilarious emojis for taunting friends when you smash their buildings or heist their vaults. Plus, Monopoly Go feels like a new, exciting, everyday thing as they have constantly changing tournaments and challenges. A ton include their own unique mini games like digging for treasure or robot pachinko machine. There's always timed events to help you win big, like massive multipliers with Monopoly Go. There's always something fun to discover. Download it for free on Google Play or the App Store. Game on with Monopoly Go on Google Play or the App Store today. JJ, the sentence, Duke fans do not want to be in the Big 12, is true in what way?
Again, I think it's waving the ACC flag, right? That you're no longer a part of the ACC. So if you're a part of the Big 12, it means that the ACC is no longer in existence. And that is a major reason why that would be the case. I think geographically, the Atlantic Coast Conference has made so much sense for the Blue Devils over the years, and now you're joining an ever-expanding Big 12 conference that is all over the place. And yes, we'll see that now moving forward with SMU, Cal, and Stanford joining the ACC. But the more overwhelming majority of teams in the conference are still relatively close to Duke, where it's located, right? So I think that's a reason why you would not want to be a part of the Big 12 conference.
North Carolina, do you feel as though the Blue Devils need to go where UNC goes, or is that just semantics to get wrapped up into but doesn't matter in the long run?
I think so. Absolutely. I think when you're talking about rivalries in college sports, I know recently you've had the opportunity to visit both of those campuses, Drake, and you know how close together they are in proximity. Just 8 miles separate the two of them. When we think about the best rivalries in college athletics, you're foolish not to include Duke and North Carolina when you look at what they do each and every season when they play one another in basketball twice a year. And so for that regard, I think when you're able to compete for the same accomplishments at the end of the season, I'm sure these athletic programs would figure out a way to still play games each and every season if they're not in the same conference. But how much more does it mean that if you beat them, you'll win the league, right? Or every single season, we've got the chance of seeing them a third time in the ACC tournament. I think it means so much that those two schools stick together. It's history, man. And we don't want to necessarily break that up.
I'll give you this. And since I'm on Locked On Blue Devils, I feel comfortable saying it. I have been to He's Not Here. I have been to Shooters, and Shooters is a much better bar. Duke's got the whole like college life scene.
There we go.
JJ, academics too. As much as they have the college life scene thing down, the academics at Duke are obviously elite. That's where the Blue Devils hang their hat in a lot of ways, especially off the field. That isn't what the Big 12 values. I feel like I've heard from a lot of fan bases across the country that joining the Big 12 would dilute the educational aspect of the university. Is that a worry of Duke fans?
I'm sure it is. I'm sure the loyal Duke fans are certainly going to bring something like that up. But as it's also well documented, Duke is such a national brand that people that have no ties to the university at all are Duke fans because they just have seen them on television over the years and kind of want to be a part of that. Duke is elite in all that it does. And so for that reason alone, I think people can kind of look past the fact that this is an academic institution because they're just so focused on seeing the Duke basketball team perform so well over the years and watching them in athletic competition that oftentimes you forget about the academic piece of this. But it is very real, right? For those that are definitely university and academic truthers, like Duke's very well esteemed in that regard. And
the JJ, the Big 12 itself has been so associated with basketball first. And I want to be clear, we can even talk a bit here about Jim Phillips and his strategies. You've already mentioned a couple with changing the headquarters. Jim had the focus of becoming a basketball conference, being the nation's best basketball conference. The ACC could claim that until about 5 years ago when there was a really true flip, Kansas and Baylor being a big part of that with a couple of national championships. In an area where Duke is so familiar, the court, is that a big part when you build the pros list of why the Big 12 would look nice to you guys?
So enticing. Absolutely. To not have to have non-conference games scheduled. I think about amazing postseason games that we've seen from the two schools in recent years. I mean, I can go all the way back to Duke and Kansas games in the NCAA tournament that have meant a whole lot to the fan base this past season. We saw Duke play Houston in the Sweet 16, and Houston's been to Final Fours in recent years under Coach Kelvin Sampson. Baylor and Duke played a non-conference game in Madison Square Garden this season. They've played in the NCAA tournament previously. Our guy Jeremy Roach has his Duke degree, and now he's going to be wearing that Baylor uniform this upcoming season. The basketball perspective, when you look at the Big 12, is incredibly exciting for Duke to attach their name to that for sure.
With Arizona to boot. I mean, it just, the conference itself keeps getting better in hoops.
No doubt.
I believe the focus from your mark is not to, as much as JJ, I wanted to give the devil's advocate segment of why Duke wouldn't want the Big 12 move. I think there are certainly reasons the Big 12 would not want Duke. The list of ACC teams, because of both revenue and footprint, that word footprint's a huge one. North Carolina seems to be the more valuable option over a private school like Duke, the state institution, or even a Virginia. Hey, nobody there is elite at football in that conversation, but ESPN, they're the ones who move the properties around. They value footprint, and the Big 12 conference has made it clear they don't want to become the best conference in college basketball. It doesn't bring the money in. Gonzaga and UConn were balked on last summer, but I think I want to make it clear Duke is more than just basketball. Is that the case when you look at the revenue numbers or when you consider what the university is?
For sure. I mean, I think we talk about what they've been able to do over the last few seasons in football have certainly been impressive. I think about what Duke's been able to do here this spring alone. You're talking about a baseball and softball team that have been in the top 25 picture and footprint this entire season. The Duke softball program has only existed for 6 years, and they're currently one of the top 3 teams in the entire nation. So very quickly building momentum there. Duke lacrosse, as much negative headlines that there might have been about a decade plus ago, still a well-regarded athletic program over the course of time and in its history. So many, many positives for Duke beyond what they're able to do on the men's basketball front.
I think this makes sense. Based on what we've deduced here, I think Duke and the Big 12 makes sense. Let's make it make sense for everybody else if it hasn't already here on Locked On Big 12 and Locked On Blue Devils, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to go see a guy who plays in a bluegrass band, and his name is Billy Strings. Billy Strings is one of my favorite artists. You might not care, and that's okay that you don't care, but I can tell you this. I'm going to go to that concert for like $25. Usually tickets would be $75, but they're $25 because Game Time is where I go to get my tickets. You want to go to an NBA game, an MLB game, go see your favorite MLB team play. The tickets there are probably $15. Well, with Game Time, right now, you download the app, you use code LOCKEDONCollege, you get $20 off your first purchase. You say, oh, wait a second, the tickets were only $15. How do I get $20 off? That's called a free tickets, how math works. Terms apply. Create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Get zone deals, flash deals, last minute deals. I usually buy tickets the day of because Game Time makes them so much cheaper. You can save up to 60% by buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. Again, download the Game Time app today. Use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. Duke is a Big 12 school. That sentence is one that I don't think is that foreign, considering 3 entities are now suing the ACC. Their TV contract could go away by 2027 if ESPN decides to drop it. And overall, the conference adding Cal, Stanford, and SMU does not push the needle enough to keep the college football playoff revenue alive moving forward. There are certain things pointing at the ACC going away, and I believe that Duke and the Big 12, especially given Duke's revenue numbers, can come to an agreement moving forward to have a partnership and involve the Blue Devils in the conference. What say you?
For sure. I think it makes sense. I think the fit would be great. I think, as we talked about a little bit earlier here today, Drake, you want to make sure that you're thinking about what's next. And Vincent Price is the president for Duke, has done a good job with that. Nina King has been awesome in her time as the athletic director, right? I think about Coach K holding his position for 42 seasons, announcing a year prior that he's going to retire. And then all of a sudden the athletic department has to think about what's next and what's the move that you make. So they're able to go and get somebody like John Shire to have a full year kind of running up to being the full-time head coach. I use that to say Duke is definitely probably thinking about what is next in that regard. And if it is a landing spot like the Big 12, I think you have to be satisfied with that, because at the end of the day, this Duke brand is going to carry wherever it is.
Is there any way that Duke makes it into the Big 10 or the SEC?
I think it's hard to think of that world, especially when you think about the SEC. And while the SEC of the two geographically is way more appealing, right? I think when you look at what Duke has done on the football field, you've got to be honest with yourself and realize that that's just not a perfect marriage to be had there. And then from the Big Ten perspective, academically, a little bit more aligned. Basketball, I think of somebody like Michigan State, who Duke sees every few seasons in the Champions Classic to get the season started. I think about what Michigan has done with their program over the years and that sort of thing. The Big Ten from the basketball level could be great. But I don't know that Duke, again, is going to hold up too much weight when it comes to the football perspective and where all of that would fall.
Brand, prowess, valuation, those are hard words for a lot of the schools that exist, not just in the Big 12 and the ACC, but also at the bottom of the SEC and the Big 10. I mean, as consolidation becomes a thing, it's not a good time to be Mississippi State or Northwestern or Purdue. And so it's not that Duke has a bad standing in college football. It's just the Big 10 and the SEC want the elite 20, 25 schools, and Duke is just on the outside looking in, as many Big 12 teams are. But one thing I'll give you for hope here, and I give this to a lot of programs, Clemson 15 years ago had the same revenue numbers as not Boston College, Bowling Green, even worse. Bowling Green. And then they just won. Anybody can win their way to relevance in college football. That's how it works. However, the opposite also applies. You can lose your way to irrelevance. JJ, given the next 5 years, let's go hypothetical, Duke basketball is still great, but football goes back to what football has been historically, which is not good, subpar, bad. Can you hold weight in a power conference? I mean, is there a way to justify Duke being in a power league if football's not there and those revenue dollars don't come in?
It gets really hard, right, when we're thinking about what these power leagues become, because we put the numbers up of where Duke ranks inside the top 30 with these schools. It's really hard to figure out where exactly Duke fits into that picture. However, the brand that it's created on the basketball floor is certainly spectacular. I think Duke men's basketball proudly promotes frequently of athletic institutions and programs that are out there. The Duke men's basketball social media following has the largest engagement and viewership than anybody, than Ohio State football, Alabama football, that have been leading the way. I mean, Duke has done an amazing job of promoting what it's really, really good at. And so even if we have a 5-year stretch of poor football once again, I think basketball is going to be fine because of the history that it can fall back on. They're still recruiting at a high level. It's an Elite Eight team this past season. So I don't see the fall off being that crazy. Just at the end of the day, if you're Duke, there are worse options out there among Power 5 teams that these new conferences are going to be choosing from. And I think Duke should feel a little bit secure that they're not going to be the last pick at recess.
Man, I'm glad you mentioned, too, earlier in the show, Duke's brand extends far past what Duke is. I mean, in the best way possible. You want to be a T-shirt school here. You want people to be walking around in a Walmart in Spokane, Washington, wearing a Duke shirt who have no relation to Duke. They just think the basketball team is cool. That plays well for you in expansion. And I do think the Blue Devils have that kind of brand. But, JJ, here's the tough one. Like, Utah, a year ago, was ready to stay in the Pac-12 and find a way to make it work. In the end, George Kliavkoff's leadership ends up destroying the conference, and Utah has to come to the Big 12. I'm not sure the Utes would have picked up the phone that day and said, sure, we'll come to the Big 12 before they figured out where the Pac-12 was going. If the calls made from Brett Yormark to Duke today to say, come to the Big 12, is it worth taking, or is there still room to feel out the ACC?
I think the phone's still on Do Not Disturb, Drake. I think ultimately, when it's all right now, at least, Duke is still trying to wave this ACC flag and still holding on to the fact that they were a founding member of the conference over 70 years ago and want to see it continue and move into this new phase with 3 teams being added to the fold and the geographic footprint continuing to expand and that sort of thing. I don't know that it's too entertaining here today. But as we know, I think back to being at SEC Media Days a few years ago, when we get the big bombshell news that Oklahoma and Texas are set to join the SEC, things can change on a dime. And with that being said, if we see the likes of Florida State and Clemson start to make the pool and go elsewhere, then we'll take the phone off Do Not Disturb. We'll start entertaining some of those phone calls and trying to figure out what life could be like after this.
That's JJ Jackson of Locked On Blue Devils. Drake Toll with you from Locked On Big 12. Thanks for making both of our shows your first listen every single day. Come back tomorrow and next week as we talk more transfer portal, not just on the gridiron, but also in basketball. Shout out Jeremy Roach and Sick'em Bears. This has been and always will be Locked On Blue Devils and Dose Grande.